So this week, the show is going to be a little bit different because we're doing our first ever live show that we held in Houston over the weekend to close out the American Soccer Insights Summit. Thanks to Rice University and Scott Powers for inviting us.
And to the whole sports analytics program at Rice. There were so many undergraduate student organizers who pitched in and really were the ones that helped make the thing run so smoothly from Friday afternoon till Saturday night. Sarah Rudd and Ravi Ravanini as well, big movers and shakers, Sam Gregory, and a bunch of other people who were very central to putting the whole thing together. It was very cool to remind ourselves, as certainly me as a formal ex-academic, that very lovely networking vibe that you can get at a conference and hear all kinds of really interesting innovations that are going on in the research around soccer analytics. There's a company called Skill Corner that is trying to be a first mover on tracking data and potentially getting tracking data into the public sphere and release a bunch of NWSL and WSL data to student researchers to present work on what they might be able to find about things going on off the ball in the women's game. So we heard, I think, 6 or 7 of those presentations, many of which were very fascinating. It cut across so many areas. I mean, there were back-end data engineers there who have absolutely no direct decision-making power and sometimes don't even necessarily consider soccer like a primary area of their work, but because of their incredibly sophisticated abilities in running databases and querying and creating code and models, they are essential elements to all analytics departments in men's and women's soccer. There were GMs there talking about their decision-making processes and how they identify and try to recruit. There were columnists, John Muller, who made a plea to have more quote-unquote storytelling in the way that we use numbers and try to communicate it both to maybe the higher-ups in clubs if you work for a club or to the general public if you're more fan-facing. We had Jen Cooper, who is basically the official historian of women's soccer in America, be the master of ceremonies. Arielle Dror, director of data analytics for BFC, talking about how the hell you put an analytics department together in a matter of weeks when you're an expansion club. Zane Tomajan, current GM and number 2 in the front office at Chicago Fire, who spent a year working under Yael Averbuch-West at Gotham FC, elucidating the questions you have to ask, especially in the women's game, of which players you should be targeting and which will be good fits for the club, even beyond the analytical elements. It was a big tent. 18 and 19-year-old undergraduates, people who have been in the industry for 20 years, everyone was being spoken to. And everyone's interests, I think, were being really well represented. And I think it's a testament to Scott and Sarah and Ravi for putting on the first pure soccer analytics conference of its kind here in the States. That should be a core element of how both teams and data providers and fans and journalists and members of the media should be folding this into their consumption of the industry for many years to come.
Before we get to our live episode that we recorded with Arielle Dror from BFC and Jen Cooper from the entire history of women's football, but also a Rice alum, we have some transfer market shit to talk about.
Yeah, just a few moves. Gotham signed a midfielder out of UCLA, Sophia Cook, 20 years old, will be there for depth behind Jalen Howell and Neely Martin. Another interesting international signing for Utah, Nuria Rabano out of Wolfsburg, left back who had lost some playing time once some German internationals had been brought in to shore up Wolfsburg's starting 11. So almost certainly be competing for a starting place in that roster.
I think she's got a real chance at winning that left back position day one.
One more Zambian for the Orlando Pride. They lost Adriana to a Saudi Arabian club for a $500,000 transfer and brought Prisa Chilufya over from Juarez, a winger, so it's like for like. Given the massive amount of wing depth that Orlando has, Chilufya is not guaranteed a starting place, but certainly, even if she is just coming off the bench, is a great depth piece that just makes Orlando's broader roster look stronger and stronger by the day. Kelly Hubley signed for Bay FC, most likely to be the first center back coming in at the sign of injury to either Abby Dahlkemper or Emily Menges.
Just Bay FC running back that Portland Thorns 2022 backline.
Hubley's 30, so you don't anticipate Menges or Dahlkemper losing their jobs to her, even though they're both over 30 as well. They needed center back depth pretty badly, and Hubley is a great way to cover that. And then the Tarciane move to Lyon got finalized. It's reported as being among the highest transfer fees in NWSL history, though we don't have an official number on that, but that suggests probably north of $500,000 US.
The number I keep seeing around is around 800K, which is, as far as I'm concerned, very good business for Tarciane.
For Houston, too. Yeah.
Given the small sample of what we saw in the NWSL, it's another move that Houston has made in what has already been a very savvy winter of acquisitions and departures.
There's some back chatter that even if Vanessa Gilles ends up not wanting to return to Angel City upon the expiry of her loan to Lyon, she might be moving elsewhere besides Lyon. Wendy Renard, obviously, is going to be 35 next year. Lyon's center back depth probably needs to get younger, and Tarciane is very, very young. If she is as good as the Brazil national team thinks she is, and if her wobbles with Houston was more about Houston and less about her, they might be getting a very good player and a linchpin for their setup for a long time to come. And if not, then it's just money to them, and Houston has potentially $800K to go keep building things for 2025.
And finally, Crystal Dunn was not a done deal to Seattle, the club that we had speculated about. She has landed at PSG for 3 years. I think PSG is a good place for Dunn to end up. It'll demand less of her than playing in the NWSL week in, week out.
That's certainly true.
And might afford her the opportunity to focus more on the parts of her game, namely the attack, that she seems to want to emphasize at this point in her career.
That's right. Yeah. And we have to imagine that this was a pretty big money deal because it wasn't just us who were speculating that Seattle was her landing spot. That was well known in the press on background and behind the scenes. Our friend Susie Rance has even posted about it. It was so far down the line that we thought it was going to be announced soon. And then all of a sudden, PSG seems to have just blown that deal up completely. And the only way that would have happened is if there was some very large amount of money that Seattle could not compete with. Gotham couldn't say no.
I personally think Seattle got away with one here. They do not need more players in their 30s in the throes of decline. So this just might be an instance where this miss forces Seattle to start playing some of what looks like a really promising young core sooner. I like this move for Dunn on a personal level. I like this move for PSG because I think Crystal Dunn probably can dominate in France. And I like this move for Seattle because they didn't end up with a 32-year-old who is in decline. All those things can remain true.
We'll be wondering how Fabrice Abriel works her in. Is it Grace Guilloro who ends up becoming the odd player out and Dunn plays a little bit more centrally? Hard to see her playing on the wing with Sakina Karchaoui there. It would be hilarious if after all of this Sturm und Drang that Dunn just ended up a left back again, but we don't know. We don't know how it's all going to shake out.
Also hilarious if Emma Hayes is telling people to go abroad to keep themselves in the game if she took Corbin Albert's spot. I think the possibilities are many and quite exciting. We touched very briefly on the Adriana deal. What do you make of that deal? I think that's the one that's the most perplexing to me.
Well, Adriana requested it. And I have to assume that, as it always is when Saudi Arabia comes calling for elite players in elite leagues, they must have just offered absurd amounts of salary that she felt she had no choice but to say yes to it. We advocate so often about players to go out and get their bag when it becomes available to them because you're not going to be able to make life-changing money, if ever, certainly not forever. You got to go do it. But given the state of Saudi Arabia, particularly with its relationship to women, this is a very awkward and uncomfortable place that I think a lot of players end up getting put in when they have to choose between life-altering money and everything that comes with being a woman inside the confines of Saudi Arabia. Women are not treated like full-class citizens in Saudi Arabia. The relationship both from the country to the player, but also the player and the team to the fans who can come watch these games is, you can say at best, very, very messy. And that's really saying at best. I hope she feels like she is comfortable and feels that she can manage all of this.
Yeah.
All the best to her, but this is a tough one.
You know, it's not a tough one. This fantastic interview we have with Arielle Dror and Jen Cooper.
Arielle is the director of data and analytics at BFC. She's also an old compatriot of the American Soccer Analysis crew. had a very large task in front of her last year to try and build up an analytics department for an expansion team with very little time, very little preparation. This was a new role for her, working team side. She offered a talk at ASI called Speedrunning an Analytics Department in Less Than 50 Days, which was the amount of time that passed between her hiring in October of 2023 and the expansion draft, which was the first main player acquisition tool that BayFC got to use. So it was an incredible talk, and we got her to expand on some of the things that came up in that talk. And then Jen Cooper, if you don't know her, follow her on Blue Sky at Keeper Notes. She is the keeper, not just because she loves goalkeeping, but she is the keeper of the statistical history of women's soccer in America before 2016. And not even the NWSL or US Soccer can lay claim to the comprehensiveness of information that she's been able to compile, collate, and offer to people. It was an amazing talk to hear the past, the present, and the future of women's statistics and women's soccer analytics coming together. We had a lot of fun.
So here's the interview.
Soccer Insights Conference at Rice University, and we were very excited to bring on someone who gave a great talk this morning, the Director of Data and Analytics, Arielle Dror, as well as our Master of Ceremonies all weekend, the keeper herself, Jen Cooper. Give a big hand for Arielle Dror and Jen Cooper. Oh, how's everybody doing? Do we have energy still? I haven't been to an academic conference in...
That coffee helped.
Okay, good. How'd your talk go this morning?
I think it went okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Arielle, you talked a lot about how BayFC, particularly the data and analytics group, you had to figure out how to adapt and evolve in an environment where you are building an entire organization from the ground up in year one. One of the things you did not mention is you also had to manage the transition of your boss, Lucy Rushton, who left in the middle of the season. How did that affect you guys' processes and how you went about and did your jobs?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we were always just focused on the next game. When you're in expansion like that, anything that's not preparing for the next match is sort of a distraction. So honestly, it was mostly business as usual. We were really lucky, I guess, on the timing that it happened right before the summer break. So we were able to all go away for a week, sort of process what had happened, and then come back and sort of try and figure out what the new BayFC staff might look like.
So what was that week like? What was that internal reset?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that one.
I knew it was going to come at some point.
Yeah, sorry.
You also talked earlier about working with Albertine Montoya, who at the beginning of the season knew nothing about XG, and who by the end of the season was dropping all the Temo Choinde quotes.
Yeah.
What was the education process like working with him?
Yeah, it was slow. Sort of like I mentioned in the talk this morning, we tried to keep it really positive. We never wanted data to feel like it was something that was being forced on them by people above them. Wanted them to feel ownership of what we were doing. We really kept it positive probably for the first, half of the season. Actually, first review, not super positive. If anyone watched our games, that makes a lot of sense. Then things sort of got better. There was a large stretch of time where we kept those ideas really positive and used them as teaching opportunities. And then once we sort of gained that trust, we were able to give more constructive feedback.
Was there a watershed moment when you realized I can actually start talking quite critically here and have it be received?
Yeah, honestly, when he told me that he didn't understand what I was showing him, when he told me that I was giving him match reports, and he just really frankly told me, he's like, I don't understand.
Why do you think it took him months to be able to admit that?
Yeah, so some of this has to do with process. We give the reports to everyone, but the people that do a bulk of match prep are the assistant coaches. So quite frankly, we weren't even sure how often he was looking at them. When we were doing review sessions to sort of understand how these reports were being perceived, Albertine was rarely in the meeting. He's very, very, very busy. It was okay. So
Constantly doing bicep curls.
yeah, that's exactly what he's doing.
Google photos of Albertine Montoya. This is the most jacked coach in all of football.
That might be true. Also, a fun fact. Sorry, I just want to say he makes me stand next to him in all of our photos because he's not the shortest coach in the league anymore. Shout out to Spirit, but he was, and he literally made me stand next to him in every photo this year.
He's been kicked off the field because security thought he was a fan, like the Spirit.
No. But I almost got that one actually after a game. He was coming into a really, really new environment. There were a lot of forces around the team, a lot of external pressure, obviously from our fans, to some extent from ownership, on ourselves. We put a lot of pressure. And so there's only like so many things you can balance at a time before you can move on to the next thing. I actually am really grateful that by the end of the season, I felt like we had a really, really good rapport. I honestly sort of expected it to take a lot longer.
You talked about the first half of the season being very different from the second half of the season. We all know the results. We all know the performances. If you guys want to see some sick data viz, Google charts, baby. This is game by game, non-penalty expected goal differential for BFC. If you guys want to, we got a screen right in front of you. You don't need to bring your necks here.
We've got our own screen.
We sort of felt like there was a moment when things started to turn around, and it felt like it came around personnel changes. You know, I'm noticing here, Savannah King, your number 2 overall draft pick and your rookie left back, she started seeing more time on the bench, and things seemed to solidify. Also, Kiara Pickett, Dorian Bailey, and Tess Bodie finally becoming that midfield felt like, and we're looking at your defensive performance overall, that seemed to be a big change. So we heard in the media a lot that bringing in Abby Dahlkemper and center back helped shore up your defense. And listen, I am not going to poo-poo the performance of Abby Dahlkemper ever. But it felt like you guys were actually kind of turning things around before that. So for the data and analytics team, what was your point of view on what was maybe helping things shift in that second half of the year?
Yeah, so 2 things. I don't have like the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure our lineup changed every single game up until where you're noting these midfield, the consistent midfield we had. And the players did not know how to play together. Obviously, when you're in expansion, none of these players have played together before. No one knows what's going on. And so the fact that we were able to finally have a consistent starting 11 where everyone was able to sort of figure out how they work together, great. I honestly think Abby is where things shifted, though. We finally had 2 center backs that could both act as pressure outlets, which we didn't really have before. So defensively, it was just a lot less for Caitlin to do. And really, like, on the field, that was a turning point. But I mean, I know this is an analytics podcast, but there was also a lot off the field that Abby contributed that I think was really important as well.
You would characterize her as a real clubhouse leader?
She's awesome, yeah.
Dahlkemper and Menges, that center back pairing, those are the 2 most experienced active center backs in the league, period, based on minutes played.
That's pretty
and playoff experience.
Yeah, I totally knew that when we decided to do it.
Jet, we've known each other a long time, you and me, and you have basically cemented your place as the unofficial, or maybe now even official, historian of women's soccer in America, especially in the early years. We know your story. You know, you didn't really start following soccer until when you were an adult in the mid-90s. What inspired you to actually start compiling statistics and create a statistical record of the women's game? Even before professional leagues existed, what made you feel like that was not only something that was necessary, but that you could do it?
Well, one, I think like a lot of people here, I think I was someone who was already into numbers, into archiving, into history, and women's soccer fit, you know, it was a nice mash of all of those. Very similar to my experience when I was here at Rice as a student, and I became the archivist for Rice's biggest intercollegiate event, Beer Bike, which kind of is what it sounds. But I maintained beerbike.com. I ran the alumni team for 15 years. I could tell you who won each year. So hitting soccer, so finding something that was bigger and obviously, you know, worldwide, you know, there's a league in every country, that kind of thing. It just exploded my horizons. And then there was also the need, and I think a lot of you have had that same experience, where I need this info, it's not out there, I'm going to build the database myself. So the first 3 seasons of the Houston Dash in Houston, I was the analyst on air on YouTube. And
Still archived. You can go listen to
still
the
archived.
podcast. Yeah.
Please don't go listen to those podcasts. I did once say Ali Krieger is a little knocked up.
And at the time, she actually wasn't.
And then I just heard myself. I was like, just keep going. But the league didn't have, it didn't have Opta yet. The teams weren't compiling a lot of information. So I started compiling a lot of information. And every now and then, the national broadcast would come in. And in the spirit of sharing, making things better, I would share my data with them. So the following year, when there was actually a national broadcast contract, they had remembered that and said, hey, would you work for us? Because you have this information and nobody else does. So I was in a particular time and place that took advantage of my beer bike fascination from 30 years prior. Yeah.
We're going to take a look at one of these legendary databases of yours. This is
So database is a nice word for something that's a lot of Excel spreadsheets.
It's a nice Excel spreadsheet just of the 2014 draft, but this is what soccer statistics for the women's game in America looked like. And this is not that long ago.
This is not that long ago. And sadly, we're still dependent on this in NWSL. I am the information director for the league. I mean, they let me choose my own title. So the 2013 through 2015 seasons are still not accessible online on the league's website. I have the PDFs from the stat service that did those seasons. So I've entered all that data in here, but I cannot, in Opta's query tool, do a search for the entire history of the league, right? So we're still dependent on my spreadsheets that have those additional 3 seasons. So if you have a player like Dahlkemper or Crystal Dunn or Lauren Barnes who played before the data was in Opta, you need those additional seasons. And I've been fighting the good fight to get them to spend the money, because that takes time and money, but to get that in there, because that history can't be lost. And it still surprises me how much recent history is lost. Like, you think of the U.S. women's national team, didn't play till 85, right? That's not that long ago. Web was a thing by the mid-90s. There's so little that's available pre-2000. And I find it a little embarrassing that the U.S. Soccer website, I cannot find a list. I have the list. There should be a list of every player who's ever been capped by the U.S. women's national team. I can find that for Iceland, Canada, France, Germany, Sweden, Netherlands. Cannot find that for USA.
Yeah, the most successful international women's program ever.
Yeah. But if you want it, go to my website, deepernotes.com, and I do have a link for it.
For those people who don't know, the NWSL is not the first and only women's professional soccer league in America. WUSA, the Women's United Soccer Association, 2001 to 2003, Women's Professional Soccer, 2009 to 2011. Where are we at with compiling that statistical record too? Because, the great Lydia Jackson had a little bit of playing time in that period. So how do you make sure that statistical history can continue?
And that's one of the many things on my, fantasy list of other projects is a WSA WPS almanac. But the good thing is the entire WPS history and the entire WSA history are available via archive.org. So I can find the box score, Sue Bird, where's my box? I can find the box score for every single game in those 2 leagues. Now, it's not going to have the extra information that we're working with now, right? I'm not going to have touches, not going to have chances created, but just to have that basic info of who played, how much they played, who scored, who was the leading. So thankfully that started, I think, right after the beginning of people actually archiving things online. That being said, there's always the danger, as we've experienced a couple times in NWSL, a complete new website launch that blows out all the Wikipedia links that anyone set up and destroys some history. But doing my best to collect as much as I can.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to help me endow a Houston Soccer History Museum, let me know.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff.
Is there a life endowment representative anywhere?
Clark
Who chip in?
And that's why Sarah mentioned yesterday, the first ever women's professional game in Houston was not the Houston Dash. It was an exhibition of WSA here on campus in 2002. Yeah. And that was a project that I spent a year bringing. But that was the league's way. They were trying to test new markets.
Right.
So I love that they did that.
What is your impression of, first of all, having this conference where you're seeing where the statistical work in soccer is now, and you see somebody like Arielle doing what she does at BFC, what kind of emotion come up for you?
It was thrilling for me to watch her presentation, to know, it's like I lived that last season, right? I'm doing the live monitoring of every game. But just the expansiveness of all the different presentations, because to be frank, I had been fairly biased. I think you've heard me complain about it in the past, since I work a lot with the broadcast for NWSL, announcers dropping XG as if everybody knows what XG means, right? All of you do, a lot of fans don't, right? Or the graphics team jumping on XG numbers because it's a really simple chart to make, without necessarily thinking of the context of, is this an interesting stat for the game that we're seeing, unless those numbers have a context and a story. But what I've seen in the last 2 days, it's just these are the kind of stories that I think somehow need to be pulled into broadcast. And also just the explosive growth. It was fascinating to me to see so many of these projects using the women's data, because now there's actually 4 or 5, 6 years of data available, and more and more websites adding that data and trying to go back and finding other data.
And again, to plug ASA, if you go on FBref and you look up NWSL advanced stats, they go back to 2019. ASA takes it all the way back to 2016. Arielle, to go off that media point, every team provides a media guide on game day, and they're filled with statistics, and they're not just goals, assists, and shots. There's more advanced data that reporters can look at when they're in the press box. But what do you think about when you're trying to figure out the story that you want to help journalists tell with the numbers that you guys are producing and you want to showcase for?
Yeah, so I actually don't do the media guide. That's all the work of our lovely communications team. So Katie Simmons was our head of communications last year. I don't know what her official title was, and she put a lot of work into those. She would sometimes come to me and be like, what do you think of this? Sounds great. I just don't know much about how they're used. Sometimes we'll go to other venues, and we're in a box to film, and they leave the media guide for us. So I sometimes look through those too. I wish that some of the stats were a little bit more complex and had a little bit more context to them. I feel like on their own, they don't make me that excited personally, but it's also hard to find statistics that you can put in a broadcast that don't take a 2-minute backstory to get to the crux of it.
And I think that's our biggest challenge as we've seen the growth in women's soccer. You're seeing the player salaries going up, you're seeing the staffs getting larger, sponsorships getting bigger, but a lot of the bread and butter parts of, what Arielle does, what I do, what communications department do, those departments are not being enlarged and are not necessarily given additional resources. And I also think we're at a big transitional time for broadcast talent, some of whom have come through the playing system, getting these kind of reports, and many of whom have not, right? So it's a generational thing. And I wanted to ask you, you talked about working with Albertine Montoya, but say the assistant coach at BFC, Angela Salem, who spent a decade playing in NWSL, what was it like giving her that information?
So first of all, I could talk about how much I love Ange all day. She's awesome. She's really into data. She was, of all the coaches, was the most excited. So she came from the Spirit. They have some data folks, so she had some level of understanding. And she sort of was just give me everything you can. I want it. I will digest it. She would come to me with very specific tasks, and I would sort of develop certain metrics off of which she was interested in. She actually was doing her A license this year, and I helped her do data analysis for her A license so that she was able to present it, which was really cool. So she's really into it.
Nice. So that's probably why it took so long for Albertine to...
Yeah, but the thing that was actually really funny is when we were looking for a 6 during expansion, we were just doing basic data searches, and she always came at the top of the list. And we were like, Ange, please retire. I'm tired. And she would get so embarrassed.
Well, and I want to ask about this because the expansion draft, the AFC went first and took Alyssa Melanson, a defender with the Reign who had barely played for the Reign.
Yeah.
She had been out on loan. And she's actually from the Houston area. And she just got her first national team cap. But what about her data convinced AFC to use their very first pick on her.
I wish I had a really fun story about this, but basically we got a list of all the unprotected players from Reign the night,
The day
before. There were probably 5 players. None of them had any significant minutes anywhere. Lucy said, go home, come back with an opinion, and everyone was like, she seems better than the other options. But I will say, I just want to be honest, like there was nothing fancy. I will say that one of our assistant coaches came in really enthusiastic, and he was like, she's going to be our starting left back by the summer. And everyone thought
he was crazy.
He was crazy. But
she is,
right.
and she got her first cap with the national team this fall.
Yeah. And big reason for your success in the second half of the year.
Yeah, again, I wish I could say there was like some like fancy math or like cool data, but she really had like no data.
Didn't have the data.
So when a coach says something like that to you, when she's going to be our starting left back by summer, what does your brain immediately do, and what do you start looking for?
Oh, I laugh. But it wasn't just me. Like every single person in the room was like, okay, we have other decisions to make. Let's move on. Sure. But like people in those rooms just say crazy things all the time, you know? But it's part of the fun, right?
Yes, this was just like not crazier than everything else that was happening in conversation.
No. But I will say of that day, like the 2 days leading up to expansion, it was kind of a blur, and that's one of like 3 things I remember. So maybe it did actually stick with me.
What was that like, just sort of being in the room going through expansion?
Yeah.
Did you feel like you started this job in October, you're dealing with this almost immediately?
Yeah.
Where were places that you talked about feeling really unprepared? Where did you feel actually prepared?
I was really lucky that thanks to the work that Lydia and Tan had done with rapid Shiny prototyping, when I was with Zealous, I actually had sort of a framework to pull like some really basic dashboards together. So I was never able to give insights like on the level that I would be really happy with, but I could give like some really surface level stuff, and I was also really good at saying no. Like that was probably more useful than the yeses. A player would come up and the coaches would be super interested, and then they would turn to me and I say absolutely not, and then
and how was that taken in the room?
At the time, really well. I mean,
has that changed?
No. I just was really shocked at how much trust I had immediately. I just remember even in some of the interviews, I mean, as a side note, my parents were like so proud of me, and so they read all the interviews with Albertine, and after expansion, he like actually said something in an article about some of the work I did. And I don't know, it just made me feel like I really, like my work was important. So the fact that I had trust from them right away was really, really special. I know it's really hard to get that from the outset.
Yeah. What was your role in bringing in some of the very large players that you brought in?
Some of those were on lists I provided.
Mm-hmm. And just so people know, I mean, we're talking about Asisata Shwala, Rachel Kununanji. At the time, Dana Castellanos looked like she was pretty promising international transfers. So, yeah, I mean, these are very high-profile players.
Mm-hmm.
So the big one I was involved with was Rudy. I was the one that prepared one of the reports to go to ownership when we were deciding if we were going to make a world record transfer fee. Which is really scary, especially when you're an expansion team, because that's a lot of pressure. That was like the really big ones. Honestly, the ones I have a bigger role in are like the smaller, like the middle of the roster, because those are the ones that are sort of like the iffy ones. For a lot of the big money players, you hopefully like have a good sense of who's good and who's kind of worth spending money on.
Is there a player that you feel like you really championed and advocated for that the team ultimately went for?
Alex Loera. But that was just like an unfortunate situation. She, from day one, was always the player that me, and also our director of recruitment, Austin Buchanan, thought we could build a team around. Obviously, just for those who don't know, she got injured really early in the season and has since moved on. But yeah, she's incredible, and that was the one that I thought was going to be really special.
And what is that like? Take me through the idea of like that much planning. And then having something like
so did you know that she got injured the day before the window closed?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was super fun.
So just like walk me through, because all the planning in the world can't prepare you for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was like the one of the 2 games I didn't travel to. I was at home. I was with our social person watching the game, and I saw her fall, and I said, let's just turn off the game. Like, I just knew it would, I mean, I think we did a pretty good job at creating some roster versatility. That was something I was also really passionate about. So we did want to find a lot of players that can slot into different positions, because you just don't know in expansion how things are going to shape up. Did I think that Kiki was going to play the 6 all season? Absolutely not. But that's the roster versatility that we went for. And you just have to make it work. I wish there was a more wise thing to say, but you're just stuck with the roster you have, and you have to make it work.
I mean, that's the dirty little secret of this business, right?
No, you just have to get through it.
Life's just what happens when you're making other plans. You're going into year 2 now, and you talked earlier this morning about all the things that you learned across year 1. What do you feel is going to be the biggest lesson that you can take into year 2 in order for you guys to find success and get back to the playoffs again?
Yeah, process is everything. Something I didn't talk about in the talk earlier was that second half of the season where we were able to integrate data and video better, also came with a change in an alignment on process. And honestly, like, when you have process, you can then be accountable for your decisions, because you have a better framework for seeing what works and what doesn't. And I think that maybe at the beginning of the season, there were some people that just were not really into process, and they were really into vibes. That's great, but it's a lot harder to evaluate where you're at with the process.
And what is the relationship between analytics and the sport on the field that your new sporting director, Matt Potter, has?
He's enthusiastic. Matt comes from a really traditional background. For those who don't know, he worked in the college game for forever, and then he coached the Kansas City Current to the NWSL final. Had actually a very similar trajectory to what Bay had, where the first half of the season real bad, and then they got together. He just believes like everything's information and you can do what you want with it, which is sort of my view on data too. Like, I can give you anything, but whatever you do with it is sort of your choice at the end. So I feel like I have a lot of freedom from him, which is great.
All right, so to close the show, we're going to play a little game. If anyone is familiar, reading Deadspin and Defector.
So good at this.
We are no gender essentialists, so we are going to expand it to Let's Remember Some WSL players. And if you don't know how this works, we're doing what all of us as sports fans always do. We're going to talk about the players who aren't necessarily the most famous ones, but when their name comes up, we're like, hey, you remember them? Yeah. And then you just talk about whatever comes into your head. So I've got players picked out for everybody on the panel. Eric picked one out for me. They don't know who's coming. So I believe, Arielle, you are going to be going first.
Great.
And it's going to be someone who helped the second half of the season turn around. Tess Bodie.
So Tess was also another one in expansion that I was really advocating for. Courage had a lot of great players in the back half of their roster. Like, whoever was constructing their roster, great job. And Tess was at the top of the list. She's also very versatile and has really great creation qualities, which is what we were most excited about. And I think she did a great job at that. She's also really funny.
Yeah, as you can clearly see.
Yeah, she's just a really funny person. She's just another person who's sort of down for everything this year.
She's got the energy of someone who is very happy to, like, paint you a beautiful painting or pop you in the mouth. You know?
Yeah, I think that's she's just like really happy to be there. She also has great food recommendations. Sorry, I just remembered. I was talking
anyone's
to
ever in San Jose,
if you ever need food in the Bay, Tess is your person. She always gives you restaurant recommendations. But really, like, I really appreciate how flexible she had been this year.
Yeah. All right. You are the keeper. Ergo. We had to choose a keeper for you.
Okay.
Jill Lloyden.
One of my favorite announcers. Lloyden is an incredible keeper that nobody knows about because, one, she came out of Villanova, which is not a powerhouse, right? But really carved out a niche for herself, especially in the WPS era, 2009 to 2011, playing behind Hope Solo for a couple seasons and then going home for NWSL to be at Sky Blue, where she was player and then player coach and then briefly coach. There are so many goalkeepers currently in NWSL that have trained under Jill Lloyden. So if you want to know who the best keepers out there to sign, I would just call Jill. I wouldn't do any analytics. I would just call Jill.
Or you can subscribe to the Expected Own Goals Patreon and listen to our interview with Jill Lloyden.
Or that.
She said something amazing in that interview. She said about her time with the U.S. women's national team, why things kind of didn't pan out for her. She was like, I just couldn't take the pressure. And I very quickly discovered that. And it's a reminder that, like, when you get to that elite level, not too many players who, because what's the most annoying thing you ever hear a sports commentator say? They're mentally soft, they can't hack it, blah, blah, blah. If you're playing in the best leagues, you probably can hack it, because it self-selects. And that's sort of what happened with Jill and with the U.S.
Well, and for keepers especially, your chances are so few and far between. Yeah. The last 15 plus years of the U.S. women's national team, they've done so little rotation among keepers. Unlike Tony DeCicco back in the day, would constantly split games for meaningless games so that young keepers could get minutes. So she's sitting behind, for a while, Scurry, Solo, and then other Nicole Barnhart, right? So she was just sitting in there as a third who would occasionally get a cap. So to do all that work and to be under all that pressure, knowing that your chances are almost nothing, I think it's different from if you're a midfielder who maybe I can cut it as a regular sub, right?
And she's one of my favorite color commentators on the NWSL.
She's so good. She's so good. She is always on the early games, Saturday nights on Ion. Let's see, the 6:30 game Central. She and JP Delacamera, they're so good.
We're getting ready for games because we usually have the late Ion game.
You get to listen to
Watching Lloyden. Ladies love Lloyden. All right, Aaron. Your player has to come close to home. You Portland boy.
Yeah.
Christine Sinclair.
This is the photo that you should show for Christine Sinclair because it speaks to the legacy, the enduring long legacy, and the arc of her career. She scored something like 114 goals in 90 appearances for the Portland Pilots as a college student.
And 2 national titles, both won in Texas.
We literally don't, oh my God, we literally don't have enough time to go through Christine Sinclair's CV.
We just found this out the other day. We were looking at minutes, just thinking about endurance for players and who has the most minutes every season. It's goalkeepers, it's center backs, whatever. Christine Sinclair in 2018 is a top 5 ranked player in single season minutes played in the NWSL as a forward
in her mid-30s.
At the age of 35
with national team call-ups.
Yeah.
So woman who just retired at the age of 41. She's insane.
331 caps for Canada, 190 goals,
Something like that.
I think actually there are 2 things I want to say about Christine Sinclair. First off, if you ever go to Providence Park, they have these disgusting 10-foot tall baby heads. There's these brass statue baby heads, and I want them to be torn down and a giant statue of Christine Sinclair
Hell yeah.
put right there in their place, because Christine Sinclair is a metronome if you look at the numbers she's produced over seasons, but she's also a testament to the evolution of a way a player rethinks how they have to fit as their athleticism changes over time. She is one of, I remember thinking this was wild, she was like a top 20 attacker in 2023 in her age 40 season in the league. That is outrageous. We celebrate Megan Rapinoe. Megan Rapinoe, and somebody mentioned this earlier, Megan Rapinoe when she was talking about winning her Ballon d'Or. Christine Sinclair is the kind of player who maybe doesn't get the same international headlines because she played for Canada, despite amassing what are unparalleled numbers. So that's my Christine Sinclair spiel.
And she's one of 3 players all time to score a hat trick against the USA.
All right, well, you didn't need to bring that up.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so
Fair enough.
So you have picked a player for me, Eric.
I have.
You did not show me. I do not know who this is. I'm about to click this button and find out who you've picked for me. Oh, my beautiful Welsh dragon, Jess Fishlock. My name is Evan Davis. It doesn't get more Welsh than that. I was making a joke to somebody last night about how my mother's family really waves the Welsh flag. My father's family really waves the Irish flag. But then you look at the genealogy, we're basically just German.
As all the Welsh people are.
Yeah, I am Welsh through my mother's father's father's father, and I started watching the NWSL at the end of the 2014 season, and that was when the Seattle Reign dominated the league, when Laura Harvey was just getting going. Fishlock was this young 28-year-old firebrand number 8 who basically would be happy to thread a line-breaking pass, and the second you tried to hit her in transition, she'd also take you out with both feet. She turns 38 this year. She's still playing for the Reign. She is Wales's greatest player, and I do know that Gareth Bale exists. It is all about Jess Fishlock. I interviewed her in 2015, and she said that the qualifying campaign for the upcoming Euros, Euro 2017, was going to be her last shot at a major tournament because it's Wales. And that was 10 years ago, and guess who's going to the Euros in Switzerland this summer, baby? And who is trying to figure out who I can steal money from so I can go? Me. No, Jess Fishlock, she's the 2021 NWSL MVP. She is a league legend, and I am very, very pleased that you picked her for me.
And she and Lauren Barnes are the last 2 players in the league that have been with the same team every single season of NWSL since 2013.
Yeah, I know. Christine Sinclair retiring last year was one of the few. Megan Rapinoe the same way. So No, she's a really special player. But you know who else is really special? Arielle Dror and Jen Cooper. Please give a big hand for our two guys.
Evan, do you want to do our outro?
Oh, yes.
You do this all the
Please
time.
rate, review, subscribe, follow us on Instagram.
Well, that was our talk in Houston, Texas. Again, thank you to everyone at ASI, the organizers to Rice University. We are filled with nothing but gratitude. That's an oversaid statement in California, but I really feel it.
And we hope you enjoyed the Chopped and Screwed remix of our theme song, which felt very appropriate to Houston. We will be back on Thursday for our Patreon subscribers. If you are not a Patreon subscriber yet, follow the link in the show notes or go to patreon.com/xowngoals. That's the letter xowngoals, where $6 a month or $60 a year gets you 4 bonus episodes every single month, access to our Discord server, as well as invites to our semi-regular in-game live streams on YouTube. If you're not following us on social media yet, do it at xowngoals. That's the letter xowngoals. We can answer any and all questions, queries, or complaints at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com.
All right, guys. Till later in the week. Bye.